I still have them. The chills, they started when I first went into your energy, and they have not fully settled even now as I press record and try to find the words for what I experienced when I was in the field around your life, reading what is there and what is building and what is about to break through the surface in the specific and enormous form of something huge actually happening. For the specific person this reading found, chills are not a common occurrence. For me, in this work, I want to say that clearly before anything else, because I do not want you to receive the I have chills as the atmospheric language of a reading. That uses dramatic framing to produce engagement without the actual and physical basis for the dramatic framing being present in the experience of the person delivering it. These chills are real in the specific and involuntary form of a physical response that the body produces without being asked. When something in the energy field being read is significant enough to produce the physical response in the person doing the reading, before the conscious understanding of what is significant has caught up to what the body already knows, in the preconscious and involuntary form of the chills that started when I went into your field and are still present as I try to describe what produced them. Something huge is happening in the field around your life right now, and the chills are the body's acknowledgement of the size of what is there. Before the words have arrived to describe the size in the full and honest form that it deserves, from the person delivering this reading to the specific person it is for. Welcome, my beautiful soul. Stay with every single word before what is huge and how it is happening and what the happening means for your life. In the specific and arriving form of something that is real and close, I need to acknowledge what I feel underneath the huge thing that is happening in the specific interior of the person. This reading is for, which is you. I feel something that I want to name carefully, because the careful naming is what produces the recognition that this message found the right person at the right moment in the right form for the something huge that is happening to be received fully rather than partially by the person it is happening for. Whew. I feel a numbness that is starting to crack, not a complete numbness and not a sudden cracking, but the specific and gradual form of something that was solid and that has been developing the particular quality of something about to give way, in the way that solid things give way when what is behind them has built enough pressure against the solid surface to produce the specific and visible form of cracks appearing in something that was solid before the pressure built enough to produce the cracking. The numbness arrived for a reason. Spirit wants me to say this first, and I am saying it first, because the numbness deserves the acknowledgement of why it arrived before the cracking is named as what is happening to it right now in the field around your life. That produced the chills in the person who went into it and felt what was there behind the numbness that is cracking. The numbness arrived because something happened in the period that preceded this moment that was significant enough to require the specific and intelligent response of the system that protects the person it belongs to from more than they can hold at once, at full volume, without the buffering that the numbness provides, when the full volume would be more than the system can hold in the unprotected and fully experienced form of someone who is receiving everything at its full volume without the numbing buffer that reduces the volume to something the system can hold, while the processing that the full volume requires completes itself in the slower and more protected form of someone who is processing behind the numbness rather than in front of it. The processing is now complete enough for the numbness to begin cracking in the specific and gradual form of something that was protecting against more than is now present, and that is therefore no longer required in the full and solid form that it was in when the protection was fully needed, and that is now cracking as the thing it was protecting against has been processed enough for the cracking to be safe for the person behind the numbness, which is you. The cracking of the numbness is the first form of the something huge that is happening, and that produced the chills in the specific and involuntary form of a body recognizing before the mind catches up that something is cracking open in the field around a person's life that was solid before, and that the cracking of is itself a form of arrival in the specific and significant form of a before and after moment in someone's interior life. Before the crack, the numbness was the primary interior experience of the daily life in the muffled and slightly removed form of someone who is still doing everything, but doing it from behind the solid surface that the numbness created between the full experience and the daily activities that require the participation of someone who is present, even when the presence is the muffled and numbed form, rather than the full and unprotected form that the numbness was protecting from what was too heavy at full volume for the period that required the numbness after the crack, something different, in the specific and arriving form of what is behind the numbness, beginning to become available again in the fuller and unprotected form that the cracking is making available as the solid surface gives way to the pressure of what is behind it. And what is behind it is the something huge that is happening right now in the field around your life that produced the chills. Spirit is showing me what is behind the numbness And I want to describe it in the specific and honest form that the chills were responding to. When they arrived in the person doing the reading, before the words had come to describe what the body was already responding to, in the involuntary and preconscious form of something recognized before it is named. Behind the numbness is the full and unprotected form of who you are, in the specific and irreducible form of someone who has not been fully available in their own life for the period of the numbness. That was protecting the full form from what was too heavy at full volume to be held without the buffer that the numbness was providing. And the full and unprotected form of you is extraordinary in the specific and chills producing form of something that has been behind a solid surface for long enough that the world has been receiving the muffled and protected version rather than the full and extraordinary version that the cracking numbness is about to make available in the world that has been receiving the muffled version, and that is about to receive the full and unprotected and extraordinary form for the first time since the numbness installed itself as the protection against what was too heavy at full volume. That is what produced the chills, the specific and involuntary recognition of what is behind the cracking numbness and what the world is about to receive. When the cracking is complete enough for the full and unprotected form to be available again in the arriving and something huge form of what this reading has been building toward since the chills started, when the field was first entered, and what was there was first felt in the specific and involuntary form of a body that knows before the mind does. Now, the second form of the something huge, because there are two, and the first was the internal cracking of the numbness that makes the full form available again. And the second is the external arrival, that the cracking is being timed with in the specific and non-accidental form of two things arriving at the same moment that were always going to arrive at the same moment, because the moment was always going to be when the internal was ready for the external to arrive, and the internal is now ready in the cracking and cracking open form of someone whose numbness is giving way to what is behind it. The external arrival is significant in the material and relational and practical dimension of your actual daily life. Something is arriving from outside in the specific and significant form of something that does not arrive for the muffled and protected version of a person, but for the full and unprotected version that the cracking is making available at the same moment the external arrival is arriving in the non-accidental timing of two things that were always going to arrive together. When the internal was ready for what the external was bringing, the external arrival needs the full version to receive it properly, That is the specific and important thing to understand about the timing of the two arriving together rather than the external arriving earlier, when the muffled and protected version was the available form of the person it is arriving for. What arrives externally cannot be fully received behind the numbing surface that the muffled version inhabits in the protected and slightly removed form of someone who is present, but not fully present in the way the external arrival needs the person to be fully present to receive what it is bringing in the full and landing form that the full presence allows, and that the numbed presence does not allow in the same full and landing way. The timing is not accidental. The cracking and the arriving are happening together, because the happening together is what allows the full landing of the external arrival in the full and unprotected person that the internal cracking is making available at the same moment. The external arrival is arriving in the non-accidental and universe-timed form of two things that needed each other to be simultaneous, for the something huge to be as huge as it is, rather than the partial something that the non-simultaneous form would produce if the external arrived without the internal cracking, or the internal cracked without the external arriving, rather than both happening at once in the something huge form that they produce together, but not separately. Spirit is showing me the timing precisely, and I want to name it in the specific and grounded form that is most useful for the person who needs to know when the cracking and the arriving converge in the visible and external form of the something huge that has been producing the chills since the field was first entered, and the size of what was there was first felt. Within the next 7 days, something becomes visible in the external dimension of your actual life. That is the first confirmable sign of the something huge that is happening in the internal and external simultaneous form that the chills were responding to when they arrived in the person doing the reading, before the words had come to describe what they were responding to, in the involuntary and preconscious form of something too significant to wait for the words to catch up. 7 days. Watch for the first confirmable sign of the cracking and the arriving happening simultaneously in the something huge form that this reading has been describing since the chills that started when the field was first entered and have not yet fully settled, even now. I want to speak to a voice now that I feel clearly in your energy, and that I want to meet directly before the 7 days begin, and before the voice speaks in the form it takes when it has not been met first. The voice says, the numbness was there for a reason, and the cracking of it, even if something huge is arriving on the other side, is not without its own cost, because the cracking of a numbness that was protecting against something also means the protection is ending. And the thing the protection was protecting against may still be present in some form on the other side of the cracking. Even if something huge is also arriving in the same moment, whew, that voice is being honest in the specific and appropriate form of someone who is not simply excited by the something huge without acknowledging that the cracking of the numbness is also a form of exposure to what the numbness was protecting against as it gives way to what is behind it. And I want to say something to that voice that I needed to hear in the honest and specific form rather than the dismissive form that would tell it simply not to worry without the actual and grounded response to the specific concern that it is raising in the honest and proportionate form of someone who has been protected and who is now unprotecting. In the cracking form, the processing is complete. That is the specific and grounded response to the specific and proportionate concern. The numbness arrived because the processing needed the protection to complete itself. Behind the solid surface rather than in front of it, at full volume, without the numbing buffer. That reduced the volume to what the processing could work with while it was completing itself in the protected and slower form. The processing has now completed, and the cracking is the natural result of a protection that is no longer needed in the full and solid form because the processing has completed what the protection was installed to protect. And the cracking is the intelligent and appropriate response of a system that knows when the protection is no longer required in the full and solid form and begins to give it up gradually. In the cracking form, that precedes the full availability of the person behind the numbness for the something huge that is arriving in 7 days. I want to give you something. Before I close, in the permission form that the cracking numbness person specifically needs before the 7 days and the something huge they contain, permission to let the cracking happen without trying to manage it back into the solid form that the numbing surface was taking before the cracking began, in the specific and protective response of someone who feels the cracking and instinctively tries to shore up what is giving way rather than letting it give way into the cracked and opening form that the something huge is arriving into as the available and opening space that the cracking is creating for the external arrival to land in. Let it crack in the natural and gradual and safe form of something that is giving way because what it was protecting against has been processed enough for the giving way to be the right next form of the system that installed the protection, and that is now uninstalling it in the cracking and opening form of someone who is ready for the something huge that is arriving in 7 days into the cracked and opening space that the uninstalling numbness is creating right now as this reading finds you. And the chills have not yet settled in the person delivering it. You are protected in the specific and post-numbness form of someone whose protection is completing, because the processing it was installed for has completed itself behind the solid surface that is now cracking into the opening form of someone who is ready for the something huge that is arriving in 7 days, for the full and unprotected and cracked open version of the specific person whose field produced the chills that have still not fully settled in the body of the person who went into the field and felt what was there before the words arrived to describe it in the form this reading is delivering it in. Now, take gentle care of yourself, my beautiful soul. The cracking is the beginning, not the breaking